Hello. This video focuses on the current topic of genetically modified organisms. This includes genetically modified crops. Specifically, we're looking at my personal opinion on genetically modified organisms as backed up by evidence.
Genetically modified crops have, of late, been in the spotlight of controversy. Perhaps the general public's low opinion of genetically modified crops comes simply from being uninformed about their existence. Despite the first genetically modified crops being introduced in the late 1980s, a national survey by PEW in 2004 showed 39% of respondents knew nothing at all about genetically modified food being sold in grocery stores, and 23% knew not too much. Stewart's conclusion, based on the PEW survey, as well as their own survey, was that the general public was mostly unaware of the prevalence of genetically modified crops, though 40% answered they would be angered over eating a GM food product without knowing it. Genetically modified crops exist in multiple generations, each being more complex and used for different purposes. The first traits to be introduced in the first generation were tolerance for herbicide and insect resistance, because these traits reduce the need to spray large fields with potentially harmful chemicals. Additionally, genetically modified crops in the first generation are more efficient than standard crops. An example, they produce a higher yield of the product. The second generation of genetically modified crops deals specifically with food quality issues, including a longer shelf life, additional nutritional quality, and improved flavor. Most recently, the third generation has focused on increasing the plant's usefulness for becoming a processed item. The guarantee is a superior product by having a lower cost and higher efficiency for mass post-production. Even in light of the many benefits, the controversy over genetically modified crops continues. One concern fueling the controversy is the impact of genetically modified crops on the environment. Specifically, worry surrounds the possible invasiveness of the genetically modified crop, as well as transgene movement, which is the spreading of the genetically modified crop's traits to its relatives in the wild.
Pollen can travel up to 4 kilometers. It knows no boundaries. And genetic modification is occurring on close to 100 million acres worldwide. It's going to be virtually impossible to keep a field from being contaminated in one way, shape, or form from genetic pollution.
Transgene movement has been documented and could become a serious issue. Having weeds with the characteristics of first-generation genetically modified crops can lead to the production of superweeds. In these cases, one would be unable to kill an unwanted superweed with ordinary herbicides, as the plant's traits caused it to become immune. Additionally, research has shown that some commercial genetically modified plants are already becoming less resistant against pest organisms, due to the pest organism building up a tolerance to Bt toxins the plants were modified to produce. Another concern is the ethics of adopting genetically modified crops on a global scale. Farmers in developing countries are informed of the cost-effectiveness provided by genetically modified crops, but also the supposed environmental benefits that accompany organic crops. There are questions as to the feasibility of both types of crops existing. Perhaps the coexistence of genetically modified and organic crops may depend on whether or not the public's opinion of genetically modified crops changes. If the general consensus stays the same, then I believe the push for organic farming is likely to continue. Finally, a major point against genetically modified food products is the belief that they could have a negative effect on human health. Standards for assessing the safety of genetically modified foods are being developed. Current evidence indicates that antibiotic resistance markers, ARMs, the way in which first-generation crops are usually modified, are not harmful. The antibiotic resistance markers must only be present for the developing stages of the genetically modified crop, though they are still usually found in the final product. Let's build a logic model for the use of genetically modified crops. First, we look at the benefits. 1. GM crops have increased biomass, meaning more food can be produced in the same number of hectares. 2. They produce Bt toxins and thereby reduce the need for pesticides. 3. Are less susceptible to herbicides and insecticides. 4. Have enhanced capabilities for dealing with drought and changes in temperature. And 5. embody human knowledge into a seed, which can be given to farmers in third world countries to assist them. Next, we examine the drawbacks. 1. There's a lack of studies on how genetically engineered foods affect human health. 2. Transgene movement, aka gene pollution, has been documented and proven. 3. They're sometimes used to eliminate small farmers because the seeds are copyrighted and expensive. 4. Has caused turmoil in countries such as Paraguay and Portugal because citizens were told GM crops were not to be planted, though they were. Our next part of the logic model deals with the stakeholders. People involved with genetically modified organisms includes biotechnology scientists, farmers, landowners, consumers of GM food, food processing companies, food advertisers, food policymakers such as Congress, and food regulators like the FDA. We conclude our logic model with the inputs to the system to make it work. 1. Biotechnology scientists to engineer the crops. 2. The seeds themselves. 3. Laborers to plant, care for, and harvest the crops. 4. Fertilizer, pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides. 5. Water and sunlight for the crops. 6. Lots and lots of money. Overall, I find myself right in between supporting and being against genetically modified crops. I prefer to lean on the side of safety and suggest that the use of GM crops should be limited until more research has been done.